haywire. So we're talking about the rebellion of Korach, who was the first cousin of Moshe Rabbeinu, and he gathers 250 people of great renown, and he accuses Moshe and Aaron of hoarding power, wanting power for themselves. They took specific issue with the appointment of Aaron as the Kohen Gadol, because they thought that it could have been shared around, and here was nepotism, Moshe Rabbeinu taking his own brother. They would bring an incense offering, and Hashem would reveal his choice as the Kohen Gadol. So there was going to be a test now. Is Moshe Rabbeinu right and correct that it's meant to be Aaron, or should it be somebody else? And they brought their incense. Moshe unsuccessfully attempts to dissuade the rebels from participating in this suicidal test. Moshe Rabbeinu knows what's going to happen to Korach and to his cohorts, but he's unsuccessful in persuading them. Moshe Rabbeinu pleads with Hashem not to accept the incense offering of the rebellious group. Korach incites the Jews against Moshe Rabbeinu. He gathers them to witness the grand spectacle of the bringing of the incense and who would be right. So Korach obviously had broad shoulders. He thought that he was strong enough and worthy enough for his incense to be received. Hashem is angered by the Jews' association with Korach, and he wishes to destroy them. Moshe and Aaron, as they've done in the past, pray for the Jewish people, and the decree is averted. And then the earth opens up and swallows Korach and all of his family, and a heavenly fire consumes the 250 rebels. So we've already had two punishments. One for Korach and his family. They're devoured by the earth actually opens up, and there is an earth, not just an earthquake, an earth, it opens up completely, and they disappear in the hole. Then the 250 people that accompanied them die by fire. I will soon see that there are other circles of influence. Aaron's son Elazar retrieves these incense pans, and he's used them to plate the Mizbeach as a visible deterrent for any individual who might wish to challenge Aaron in the future. So the copper pans that were used in this test as to who Hashem was going to respond to and receive the incense, and ultimately it was the incense of Aaron, and the other incense was not received by Hashem, and the fire breaks out. Firstly, the earth swallows up Korach and his family, and then the fire from these pans destroys 250 people, the immediate circle around Korach. And these plates that were used to bring the incense were now preserved to plate the entire altar, the entire Mizbeach, with these plates so that it would be remembered, this event. The community now, believe it or not, blames Moshe and Aaron for the death of God's people. Why have you caused the death of so many people? As if Moshe and Aaron had engineered this. It was Korach, we know. God informs Moshe and Aaron that he intends to destroy them in an instant, and a plague strikes the nation, many thousand died. So he actually had death by being swallowed up by the earth. That was Korach in his immediate family. The second form of death was to the 250 cohorts who surrounded Korach. They died by fire. And then the rest of the nation that were maybe a little ambivalent and not sure exactly where to put their, so they kind of followed Korach, they died by plague. And then a representative staff for each tribe contained the names of the tribe, princes, not princes, princes. And Aaron's name was written on the staff to represent the tribe of Levi. So there's going to be a second test now. First test was whose incense Hashem was going to respond to. Now there was a test of every tribe's representative would come forward with a staff, a stick. And Aaron was the representative for the tribe of Levi. His name was written onto that stick. There were 12 in all. These staffs were placed overnight in the holies of holies. And miraculously in the morning, all the sticks remained the same except for Aaron's. Aaron's staff blossomed with almonds. A dry stick turned into a live branch of a tree producing almonds. Further proof that Aaron was Hashem's choice for Kohen Gadol, because only one stick had this miracle happen, and that was to the stick of Aaron. So further proof that Aaron was and Moshe Rabbeinu were right. Aaron's staff is then placed in the Holies Holies, where it remained perpetuity. So we don't know where it is right now. It's hidden somewhere in the catacombs, in the tunnels underneath the Temple Mount, somewhere in the Temple Mount, are items that were not taken by the enemy, but they remained hidden away. Hashem commands the Kohanim and Levim to prevent unauthorized entry by non-Kohanim. Okay, this is like reaffirming the responsibility to respect the Kohanim as Hashem had told Moshe Rabbeinu, that the rebellion, in fact, was ill-fated. Then, now to enforce and to recognize the importance of the Kohanim in the midst of the Jewish people, there were now gifts that were given to the Kohanim, including 7 parts of the sacrifices. There was a 5 shekel for the redemption of firstborn sons, also went to the Kohanim, a small portion of all grain, of all oil, and of wine and crops, and the first fruit and more, like challah, and all the other things that were given to the Kohanim. The Kohanim will not receive a portion in the land of Israel. Hashem hi nachalatam, God is their inheritance and portion, and therefore they didn't inherit land, but they were given gifts by the Jewish people to perform their duties. So kind of an endorsement of the Kohanim, the priests, after having had this rebellion, supposedly want to take away power or the authority, the kedusha of the Kohanim. The Levim will receive 1/10 of all the crops, but no share in the land of Israel. Remember, the Kohanim were a subset, a sub-family of the Levim. The tribe of Levi included all of the Levim, and then amongst them was Aaron, and his descendants was a sub-category within the tribe of Levi, which were the Kohanim. The Levim must separate 1/10 of the tithes that they receive and give it to the Kohanim. So the Jewish people gave 1/10 to the Levim, and then the Levim gave 1/10 of that to the Kohanim. That's the storyline of this week's portion: rebellion in progress, and the rebellion is squelched. The putsch does not actually succeed. Let's go through some of the messages we can take from this. We mentioned in the ad for this shiur that some people take and some people give. And whilst some takers eat better, the givers sleep better, because you can be greedy and grab and supposedly enrich and improve your life's conditions. But at the end of the day, the person who's honest and is not self-centered and grabbing everything for themselves with greed, so that person sleeps better. The very first word of this week's portion is vayikach, that's the verb, and Korach took. It's introducing the rebellion. And it says, and Korach took, and with him 250 men, and they came against Moshe Rabbeinu. It's a strange verb, and he took. What was he taking? So most of the commentaries say, if you want to know where Korach was heading, sometimes the greatest freedom fighters, the people who supposedly stand up and preach about the importance of human rights and reaching every single person and ensuring that people have all that they require, that's the rhetoric. But what are they actually interested in? They're interested in themselves. And we think of many politicians that stand up before elections and say, I'm here to make sure that there's service providers and that we're going to make sure that the electricity is going to be going on the whole time, not stage 6 and not even stage 2. And in fact, the country is going to operate, going to work because I'm going to give my life for the benefit of the people. And then they get elected, and then they forget until 4 years later when they have to get elected again. And they're on the gravy train. So politicians are often a good example of what Korach's motivation was. Supposedly, it was about equality, that everyone should have a share. Why is there a Moshe Rabbeinu? Why is Moses or Aaron more holy than anyone else? Aren't we all? Kol ha'am kulam kadoshim. The whole nation is holy. Everyone is holy. Why would we think of these two individuals being more holy than anyone else? So it sounds like Korach really was concerned about the rights of all of humanity. But in actual fact, he wanted power for himself. He wasn't fighting the system. He was just saying, why let it be Moshe and Aaron? Why is it not me? And so often the rebellions and revolutions of the world have resulted in newfound trouble and sorrows. When you think of the French Revolution, all that was achieved in France after the revolution, so many things. the big three, and there was now universal suffrage and voting, and people had rights. But very soon after that, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It went to Napoleon's head, and eventually people were actually questioning whether what resulted from the revolution was actually what they intended in the first place. The Russian Revolution. Everyone was talking about everyone being equal and everyone having a share and everyone being important. And Stalin murdered millions of people. They were ruthless. So often leaders portray themselves as caring for the people, but the operative verb is vayikach. He was here to take, not to give. And we have to be very careful when people stand up and make beautiful speeches about how important it is to give, and they're here to ensure that everyone gets what they require. But in actual fact, what they are after is taking. And that's why in Ethics of Our Fathers it says, just know the difference between a machloket, an argument that is for the sake of heaven, and an argument that is not for the sake of heaven. An argument for the sake of heaven endures. It has a result that is positive. And an argument that is not for the sake of heaven only brings distraction. What is an example of an argument that was not l'shem shamayim, that was not for the sake of heaven? Was Korach and his people. Because they came and they didn't really have the intention of bringing godliness into the world and doing it for the name of Hashem and to spread holiness in the world. No, that wasn't the intention. Hillel and Shammai were protagonists and argued many issues in the Mishnah, and they were on different sides for many issues, and one could imagine that they were really at each other because they had different opinions, very strong different opinions. But that is how they argued the facts of Torah law. But inherently, they loved each other, they respected each other, they cared for one another. That's an argument that's not about subjective human weakness, that's about objective truth, trying to get to the bottom of it. So that is an argument that endures forever. The value of both sides of the argument endure forever. So when we learn a Mishnah thousands of years later, we still learn what did Shammai say and what did Hillel say. They both contributed, they both added to the big picture of Torah. Their argument was for the sake of broadening the scope and the knowledge of Torah. So therefore their statements endure. Korach, he came supposedly wanting to give everyone their human rights, but by Yikach, he was a man that was out to take. He was a taker. And as a result of that, his argument only resulted in death, destruction, loss of life, the immediate family, the 250, the thousands of by fire, the thousands of people by plague. That's what resulted. It's also interesting in Ethics of Our Fathers when it says, what's an argument that is for the sake of heaven? Hillel and Shammai. So it presents the two sides of the argument. Hillel said one thing, Shammai said the other thing. When it brings the example of a machloket shelo l'shem shamayim, an argument that is not for the sake of heaven, it should have said, that was like Korach arguing against Moshe. It doesn't. It said, you want to know who the argument that is not for the sake of heaven is? It's the argument of Korach and his cohorts. Well, what do you mean, his cohorts? They were on the same side. Why are you saying the argument of Korach and his cohorts, as opposed to Hillel and Shammai? They were two sides they were on the opposite sides of the argument. Supposedly, Korach and his people are on the same side. So very, very insightfully, the commentaries explain that when you come with an argument that is not for the sake of heaven, you're not only arguing with the people that you've declared the enemy. Nobody is really a friend. In politics, even the coalitions and even the joining together of the different parties that are supposedly taking on and wanting to make a revolution, inherently the argument is between them themselves. Nobody is really out for truth. So even the side that presents itself, Korach and all his guys, there was dissension in those ranks too, because when it's ego and arrogance and taking and for yourself, nobody is your real friend. Everyone is a threat to you because it's about me. It's about my ego. You only lose yourself if you're arguing l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. It's not about me. I've told often the story of having the opportunity as a yeshiva student in the house of the great Rabbi Landau, who was the chief rabbi of Bnei Brak. I'm talking about the Zayda. Since then, he passed away, and his son took over. He's since passed away, and his grandson is now the rabbi of Bnei Brak. This Rabbi Landau was very close to my father, so I spent Shabbos there on numerous occasions. And at the Friday night table, the two sons, Reb Moshe, who taught me in yeshiva, and Reb Eli, who taught me in yeshiva, started arguing. And it was such a vociferous argument, I was worried that the knives should be removed from the dining room, because the volume and the intensity of emotion rose to such a pitch and to such a level. I thought they were going to come to blows, God forbid. And then suddenly the mother came in with a gefilte fish or the soup, and everyone sat down and we ate. And then they were talking about what happened yesterday and tomorrow and what's happening in the family. I was looking, what's going on over here? I thought they were attacking one another. And so calm, everyone's loving, everyone's just eating together. This is a pure, perfect family scene. And then the soup was finished. Now they were continuing with the discussion. And boom, the energy levels went all the way to the top, and the room was shaking, the table was shaking again. And I was introduced to what it means to be a machloket, an argument, l'shem shamayim. They weren't arguing because of me, I said, and you said, and how could I'm better than you? None of that. That's ego. They were arguing the issues vociferously because it was important to them. And they were conveying what was as strong as they could possibly get their message across. Inherently, they loved each other and they were brothers. And the father was having nachas to see his sons so involved emotionally in something that was so close to their heart, which was the learning of Torah. We should know what arguments they are, and what arguments we're picking. Sometimes we feel very self-righteous about our arguments and about how we want to improve things and how things can get better. We make our own many little revolutions in life. We stir and we try and change things, and we have to be honest enough to question. Close our eyes and ask ourselves, what's my motivation? Am I a giver or am I a taker? Is this about the issue or is this about me? And the best way to evaluate it, to say, well, if it's so important that there be a new leader in place, what if it would be somebody else, not me? Would I be ready in a second to say, I want new leadership and I'm ready to put myself aside and let it be somebody else? That's a good test, because very often we're so caught up in ourselves that becomes the whole issue. When it comes to egos, it undermines everything. So we've had a very short share because of, I'll just see if anyone's still arriving, because of load shedding and trying to get everyone together, so I apologize. I'll just keep going until the next year we're ready to start. There's a general concept in the Talmud that tells us, woe to the wicked and woe to his neighbor, which means that often the way we are hanging around, the friends that we choose, I think Winston Churchill once said, you tell me who your friend is and I'll tell you who you are. Often we're very defined by the people that we are close to, our circle of friends. Who do we surround ourselves with? And often when we befriend or live in an environment that is inherently weak, it rubs off on us, and we unfortunately are in a similar situation. The Talmud learns us from the story of Korach being very close in their camp, where they camped out, to the tribe of Reuven. And who came from the tribe of Reuven? Datan and Aviram. They were the known troublemakers of the Jewish people. They had stirred trouble in the ranks long before Korach came onto the scene. Remember when Moshe Rabbeinu killed the Egyptian that was smiting a Jew? Remember that story? The guy's waiting to come in. So you remember the story when Moshe Rabbeinu was slayed the Egyptian, then he had to run for his life because somebody confronted him and said, I saw. Now we know what happened. Who was it? Datan and Aviram, these two guys. Then they were antagonistic to Moshe and Aaron in Egypt. When it came to the manna, they deliberately took it when they shouldn't, and they put out on Shabbos. They were stirring trouble all the time. They joined Korach. Where do we see that? In this map, that I have on my screen right now, you can see that the middle was the very epicenter was the tabernacle, that's the Mishkan, and these four areas around it were the four families of the Levim. On the right-hand side, Kahat, you had the family of Korach in this section over here, and right next to him was Reuven. So we see that the tribe of Reuven, which had Datan and Abiram the stirrers, the troublemakers, right next to where Korach and his family were camped. Just an example, when you dwell right next to the people who are constantly undermining, it'll rub off on you. Choose the friends that are positive, and you might be more positive yourself. Sorry, the time has run out so quickly on us. Let's all be givers and not takers. Have a beautiful week and a beautiful Shabbos. God bless. I'll send it out on the Zoom.